Five on a Farm here. It's early June and it's time for rhubarb. So when the rhubarb comes on, I get to making my rhubarb jam. So as you can see here, I've got my canning space all set up. I've got a small pan with my lids and my rings, just on a very low warm. Don't bring it to a boil. The other thing that I'm doing with that today, I'm just warming my jars up in water. My dishwasher is out of commission right now, so I want to just warm up my jars a little bit. I'm making a freezer jam, so I do not need to boil or do a water bath for my jars. Once I get everything done, I just need to make sure my jars are sterilized. Here I've got my stock pot where my ingredients are ready to go. I've got my cookie sheet. I like to have a cookie sheet out and ready. I cover it up with some towels. That way when I am ladling my mixture from my stock pot into my jars, I cover the pan with the towel. I can catch any drips, and then when I have all my jars filled, I cover it with another towel, and then I pick it up and take it to where it needs to go, away from a draft. Okay, now I know this recipe calls for a potato masher because I have to mash up my rhubarb once it starts becoming tender in the stock pot. I've got my ladle, got my funnel, I've got my lid lifter, which is magnetized. It will go over there. I'll lift up the lids and the rings so I can put them on top of the hot jars. I've got my jar lifter, which is simply, in this case, just to get the jars out of there because they're pretty hot. Got a nice spatula. I like to have a spoon handy in case I overfill one of my jars. I can easily scoop it out and pour it into another jar. And then of course, once you ladle the mixture into the hot jars, you always want to use some white vinegar. Dab your paper towel in the white vinegar and clean off the rim before you put your lids and your rings on. Okay, so I think we're all ready. We're going to get started making rhubarb raspberry peach jam. So I've got about 5 cups of finely chopped rhubarb. I've got a 1 can of peach pie filling and 2 3-ounce boxes of raspberry gelatin. So I usually buy mine in bulk, and so this is the equivalent of 2 3-ounce. I've measured it out. It's the equivalent of 2 3-ounce boxes of raspberry gelatin, 5 cups of white sugar. So here I've got my rhubarb and my 1 cup of water in my stock pot. I'm going to go ahead and get that cooked down so that the rhubarb becomes tender. Over here I've got my rhubarb. It has been coming to kind of a boil and with the water in it, just enough to make it tender. And then you go ahead and just take a potato masher, mash it up to get all the chunks out. Okay, and once you're confident that you've got everything ready, I have taken it off the heat, so it's plenty warm. Okay, I feel pretty confident that we've got all of the chunks of rhubarb worked out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and add my next ingredients. Now, to our rhubarb and water mixture, we are going to add our 5 cups of white granulated sugar. To that, we will give it a stir, stick it back on the heat, and we're going to let it cook for 10 minutes. Once you cook rhubarb, it does release a little bit of liquid. Even though I added a cup of water here, definitely got plenty of liquid. Don't want it too liquidy or your jam is not going to set up. This recipe is, like I said, it's a freezer jam, and normally I prefer to make cooked jam, but this is one of the best recipes I found. It's so easy, so simple, and I thought I would get started showing you some of my canning techniques with a really simple recipe. Probably get about 6 jars from this recipe, and they go right in your freezer once they're cooled down. So it's a very simple recipe. I highly recommend this for new canners. Okay, feels like I've got all of the sugar chunks worked out of there. I'm going to stick it back on the stove. And we're going to let this cook just for 10 minutes under a medium heat. Our sugar and rhubarb and water mixture been on here for about 5 minutes, coming to a boil nicely. We've got about another 5 minutes left, so I went ahead and lowered the temperature a little bit. I want to make sure that I don't scorch it, and I want to make sure that I don't cook it so long that I'm cooking all of the moisture out of this. You definitely want to keep some moisture, or your jam is going to be really, really thick, and it's not going to be like a jam consistency. So make sure that you're consistent with your temperature and your time. Keep stirring it. Oh, there's a piece of rhubarb that didn't get crushed. It's okay. You want to make sure you don't overcook at this point. Well, I've got my rhubarb coming to a boil and cooking in the water, getting tender. I've opened up my peach pie filling. Now what you don't want is to use whole pieces of pie or whole pieces of peach. Okay, you want to make sure that your peach pie filling does get cut into smaller chunks. Jam is supposed to have chunks of fruit, but not whole pieces of peaches. So just take a knife, kind of go around inside of your can of pie filling, and that should cut everything up nicely for you. Okay, it's been a full 10 minutes here with our rhubarb, sugar, and water. I'm going to go ahead and get that pulled off the heat right now. Now it's on to our next step, where we add our peach pie filling. And like I told you, I went ahead and cut it down into smaller pieces. Go ahead and get that added in there. Once we get that stirred in completely, all the pieces kind of broken up, the gelatin from the pie filling kind of broken up a little bit, we're going to stick it back on the heat for another 6 to 8 minutes. Mixture ready for the gelatin. We've turned off the heat, pulled everything off the heat. We're going to add the raspberry gelatin to the mixture. Now this is the equivalent of 2 3-ounce boxes. So there's approximately 7 tablespoons per 3 ounce. So I've got about 14 tablespoons here. Raspberry gelatin. Now you want to mix this in off the heat. Mix it in until the gelatin is completely dissolved. And then we're going to start jarring up our jam. Now look what a beautiful color this has turned. This is a beautiful addition to a white cake. So what I like to do is I'll pull a jar or two of my freezer jam out of the freezer, let it thaw, and then I'll bake a white cake. Once the cake has cooled off, I will poke some holes in the top of it, maybe with like the bottom of a wooden spoon. Or you can use candles or anything like that. Poke some holes in the top of it. Basically, it's just a poke cake. Poke cake. Poke the holes in the top of the white cake, and then what I like to do with the jam is warm it up in the microwave for maybe 30 seconds or so, till it's a little liquidy. Then pour the jam over the top of the cake. Let the jam seep down into the holes of the cake, and then frost it with some whipped topping. And it is just a really light, delicious, and beautiful summer cake. Okay, so I think we've got everything dissolved in here. While it's still warm enough, I want to get my jars filled up with this beautiful peach Melba jam. Okay, got my jars all ready here with my funnel. Take your ladle, dig right in there, get a good spoonful. Drop it right into the jar. And you want to fill it up to about that point right there. I say about a quarter of an inch from the top of the jar. It's where you want to stop filling. Okay, beautiful. Next, take your paper towel, dip it in your white vinegar, and you just want to go right around the rim, the top, and the sides, just in case you might have dribbled any of the mixture. Same thing here. Get a fresh side of my paper towel. Okay, that just keeps it nice and clean. You want to make sure that you don't have anything on your rims. Do it again. Okay, tighten it up a little bit better than that. I'll put the camera down and then I'll tighten it up a little bit further. But that's what you want to do. Now this is freezer jam, so you do not need to do a hot water bath. Okay, we're just going to let it cool off here on our, we're going to let it cool off here on our, this is just a little dribble. We're going to let it cool off here on our cookie sheet that we have covered with a towel. When I get all my jars filled up, I'm going to go ahead and cover the whole thing with a towel so that as I carry it through the kitchen, no cold breezes will hit on my hot jars. So how's that? That's beautiful. Okay friends, so here's what we ended up with. This is our rhubarb raspberry peach freezer jam, and we ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 jars of the rhubarb raspberry peach freezer jam. I'm going to go ahead and throw a towel over top of this and walk it over to its resting place. Cover it up with a towel as you're walking through your kitchen, just because there are drafts all over, from ceiling fans, open windows, fans running, doors opening, you just never know. And the last thing you want is for your beautiful piece of art to crack and all of your ingredients to go everywhere. So here's my final resting spot. I've got a little quiet corner of my kitchen. I've got my rhubarb raspberry peach jam, and then this is the batch I did earlier. This is rhubarb blueberry raspberry. Look at that. How beautiful is that? That's gorgeous on one of those poke cakes like I told you. For that, with that one, I used blueberry pie filling. Okay, we're going to let them sit here. What you want to do is let your jars rest. The lids will pop once the jars are sealed, and everything will cool down. And then once everything is cooled down, we'll go ahead and get them put in the refrigerator or in the freezer, and it'll probably be about 24 hours. So sometime tomorrow, I'll get them loaded up in the freezer. I'll get them labeled, and then I'll get them loaded up in the freezer. And we'll have some wonderful jam in the winter. That's how I make freezer jam. So here we are, the morning after. I did my rhubarb jam. I did 2 batches of rhubarb jam. Got everything served up. It's been 24 hours. All of my jars have sealed, and I can tell that by looking to see if the lids have been pulled in. So the hot liquid inside was enough to pull the lid in and create a vacuum, and then you can just kind of very gently check each of them just to make sure that you're not seeing a lid that's popped up. If you have a lid that's popped up, then you know you've got a jar that hasn't sealed. Beautiful. All mine have sealed. This is my rhubarb blueberry raspberry jam. This is a freezer jam. So once I get the jars prepared, they'll go right in the freezer. This is my rhubarb peach raspberry jam. This one looks like it's a little on the runny side. Doesn't matter, it'll go in the freezer and it'll firm right up. So I would say all in all, did pretty good with one batch of rhubarb jam. So watch again for more canning, cooking, good stuff here on the farm at 5 on a Farm, Ohio.